come at Burr.
Watch Behn Wilson because he
speared him. Can't not to hurt them. Look at that, right there.
Jabbed
him right in the Burr without it.
I said, "What's that, Bobby?" He said, "Is there somebody out there that's playing that I don't want to use the word you're afraid of, but you're just not sure whether you want to go back and try it again. You know, you want to fight him again." And I said, "Well, Bobby, to be honest with you," I said, "it's probably Behn Wilson after that fight we had with him on the island." He says, "I know it's Behn Wilson."
In the history of the NHL, the 1970s and 1980s were the most violent era the league had ever seen. Among the Philadelphia Flyers, a team already feared across the entire continent of North America as the Broad Street Bullies, one man stood apart as something darker: Behn Wilson. 6'3", over 200 pounds, and carrying a reputation that made even the toughest players hesitate. Clark Gillies, one of the most feared fighters of his generation, said it plainly: "Wilson is the only one who made me feel I truly had to mentally prepare before facing him directly." 7 stories will show you exactly why. By 1986, Behn Wilson was wearing the jersey of the Chicago Blackhawks. He was older, but no less dangerous. In a game against the St. Louis Blues, a player named Burr made contact with Wilson. What happened next shocked everyone in the building. Wilson did not respond with his fists. Instead, he drove the blade of his stick directly into Burr's lower abdomen, a move officials immediately flagged as an intentional act to injure. The referees handed him a 5-minute major penalty and ejected him from the game. But the message had already been delivered. This was not a moment of blind rage. This was calculation. Wilson knew exactly what he was doing, accepted the consequences, and walked away having made his point with absolute clarity. Commentators at the time were visibly shaken. One described it as clear intent to injure, words rarely used even in that brutal era of hockey. Bobby Clark, the legendary captain of the Philadelphia Flyers and one of the hardest men ever to play the game, always spoke of Wilson with genuine respect. Clark acknowledged that Wilson's willingness to protect his teammates, by any means necessary, set him apart from every other enforcer of his generation. Opponents feared him. Teammates trusted him completely. In the early 1980s, Clark Gillies of the New York Islanders was considered the undisputed heavyweight champion of the NHL. He was the physical enforcer behind one of the most dominant dynasties the league had ever seen. A man whose reputation alone was enough to make opponents think twice. Nobody knocked Gillies off his throne until 1981. The Philadelphia Flyers and the New York Islanders were bitter rivals. When these two teams met, every shift carried the weight of genuine hatred. It was in this atmosphere that Behn Wilson walked onto the ice and did something few believed was possible. Wilson used his signature technique, his left hand clamping down like a vice grip, locking Gillies' right hand completely out of the fight, while his own right hand delivered short, precise, devastating hooks. Gillies had no answer. The man who had dismantled everyone before him was taken apart in one of the most one-sided exchanges of his career. The consequences lasted years. Gillies later admitted in an interview that after that night, he genuinely hesitated at the thought of facing Behn Wilson again. It took a private conversation with his teammate Bobby Nystrom to rebuild his confidence before a rematch in 1984. One eyewitness inside the league summed it up simply. You could argue Gillies stood at the top until the night Wilson took him apart in 1981. That was the moment the balance of power in the NHL changed. Paul Baxter of the Pittsburgh Penguins was not a man who frightened easily. He was a known agitator, a player who made a career out of provoking others and walking away untouched. In 1981, he made a decision he would not forget. Baxter landed a sucker punch on Behn Wilson when Wilson was not looking. It was the kind of move designed to drop a man before he could respond. Wilson did not drop. What happened next stopped everyone in the building cold. Wilson rose from the impact in a state that witnesses described as absolute rage. his eyes locked onto Baxter. Referees moved in immediately. Other players stepped between them. None of it mattered. Wilson drove through every obstacle, pursuing Baxter across the ice with a single-minded intensity that went beyond anything the crowd had seen before. Baxter, a man who had never backed down from anyone, ran. One person who witnessed the incident from close range recalled it years later. Wilson completely lost it. When that sucker punch landed, something in his head just snapped. He came forward like he wanted to tear Baxter apart piece by piece. Terry O'Reilly of the Boston Bruins carried the nickname Taz, short for the Tasmanian Devil. It suited him perfectly. O'Reilly was a warrior who never backed down, never stayed down, and never stopped coming forward. In 1980, he met Behn Wilson twice in the same game. The first exchange ended with Wilson landing a hard right hand that sent O'Reilly to the ice. Most enforcers would have considered the matter settled. Wilson did not. Before the final whistle, Wilson found O'Reilly again. This time, O'Reilly came out throwing left hands in rapid succession, trying to overwhelm his opponent with volume. Wilson absorbed the punches with unsettling calm, waited for his moment, and then answered with a series of precise right hands that put O'Reilly down a second time. 2 fights, same opponent, same result. Tim Kerr, who skated alongside Wilson during those years in Philadelphia, reflected on what made his teammates so uniquely frightening. I sometimes felt sorry for the guys who fought Behn, because if the first fight did not fully settle things in his mind, he would come back and find a second one before the game was over. He was the hardest man I ever played with. Keith Magnuson was a veteran defenseman who had spent years establishing himself as one of the toughest players in the league. He was not someone opponents took lightly. When he stepped onto the ice at Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, he carried the full weight of that reputation with him. It was not enough. Within seconds of the fight beginning, Behn Wilson landed a combination that put Magnuson down and out. The speed was startling. The power behind each punch was described by reporters covering the game as something close to devastating, the kind of force that could shake even the largest men in the building. Journalists who covered the NHL during that period wrote that Wilson's punches carried a weight unlike anything they had regularly witnessed on ice. The night in Detroit did not create his reputation. It confirmed it. Stan Jonathan of the Boston Bruins was a fighter who belonged in any conversation about the toughest players of his era. He was smaller than Behn Wilson by a significant margin, but what he carried inside made up for every inch he lacked. Jonathan had knocked out Pierre Bouchard on national television. He was not a man who intimidated easily. When the two met, they exchanged heavy punches that shook both men. Then Jonathan did something unexpected. He stopped, looked directly into Wilson's face, and smiled. It was a psychological move, a statement, a way of saying that nothing Wilson had thrown had reached him where it mattered. Wilson did not flinch. He did not react with anger or frustration. He simply became colder, more focused, more dangerous. Analysts who covered that era of NHL fighting considered their confrontation one of the most compelling heavyweight exchanges of the period, not because of the punches, but because of what the moment revealed about Behn Wilson's mind. In March of 1978, the Kingston Canadiens faced the Sault Ste. Dead. As Gretzky moved through the neutral zone, Wilson met him with a direct, full-force body check. The collision was immediate and total. Gretzky went down hard onto the ice. Those who witnessed it described the hit as the kind of contact that leaves no room for anything except the floor. Don Cherry, one of the most recognizable voices in the history of Canadian hockey broadcasting, described the moment as a trolley tracks hit, the term used for a collision so perfectly timed and placed that the player receiving it never had a chance. Gretzky played only a short shift afterward before leaving the ice, showing signs consistent with a concussion. Wilson, meanwhile, was not finished. He went on to score the overtime goal that won the opening game of the series for Kingston. One observer captured it plainly. Gretzky was rarely figured out. but Wilson proved that nobody is untouchable. Behn Wilson retired from professional hockey in 1988. Over 9 seasons, he appeared in 601 games, scored 98 goals, added 261 assists, and accumulated 1,480 penalty minutes. In his finest season, 1980-81, he led the entire Philadelphia Flyers roster in scoring plus-minus at plus 41, while simultaneously leading the team in penalty minutes. In the NHL, many players hit hard. Many played dirty. Many were genuinely skilled. Very few made legends hesitate. Behn Wilson was one of them. Please like and subscribe to support us, and let us know in the comments, who do you think was the most feared fighter in NHL history?